Office of Water Resources. Just want to thank you for being here and making time to be part of this workshop. My name is Brian LaFale. I'll show you my face in a few minutes when we do introductions. I'm the new supervisor of the RIPDES Municipal and Industrial Stormwater Program. I've been an employee at DEM for 20 years. I'll get a little more into my background in a few minutes. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we are going to be recording this meeting for future use. So keep that in mind. The intent of the meeting is to preview the proposed changes to the 2024 MSGP or multi-sector general permit before the formal public comment period begins. It's also an opportunity to gather stakeholder feedback. That's very important to us. And before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that, DEM's goal is not to issue permits and, put burdensome requirements on people. Our real goal, just to step back, is to improve water quality in our state. So that's always at the top of our mind when we do anything. We still have many water bodies that continue to be impaired, not meeting water quality standards. And a significant reason for that is stormwater discharges, not just from industrial sites, but many different types of sites, including industrial sites. As many of you may know, we recently celebrated 50 years of the Clean Water Act. Although tremendous progress has been made, we have much work to do, and we can't achieve our mission here at DEM without your help. So we appreciate you being here. So we're going to get into some introductions. Again, as I said, my name is Brian LaFale. I'll show you my picture. I've been here at DEM for 20 years. I worked in the RIPDES program for much of that time, but I also worked in the septic permitting program. So I've done a lot of permitting. I'm an environmental engineer by training, professional engineer, and I work with Jennifer Stout, who will do an introduction in a couple minutes. And Crystal Charbonneau is also part of our larger team. Many of you have probably met Margarita Chatterton or Elliot Anderson in the past. Both of those excellent individuals have moved on to EPA Region 1. So we're following in their footsteps. So our new team is basically Jennifer and myself. We're actually looking to hire a new employee over the next month. So we hope to get someone on board soon to help us with our work. We established a new website address that's easy to remember. It's shown on the screen, dem.ri.gov/MSGP. So if you have any questions about the MSGP, that's the easiest way to get to the website. And also, if you need to reach us, we established a new email address that will go to Jennifer and myself and whoever else joins our team. That's dem.ripdesmsgp@dem.ri.gov. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Jen so she can do her intro and then on to Crystal.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jennifer Stout. I'm an environmental engineer here at DEM. I've been with the RIPDES program for almost 20 years, been with the department longer. Most of that time I've been working with municipal stormwater, so some of you might recognize me from the MS4 permit program, but I'm guessing that I might be a new name for most of you. So it's like Brian said, it's just he and I for now, helping you out with the new MSGP. And we also have the next lovely person who assists us greatly, Crystal Charbonneau. So I'm going to pass it off to her. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jen. And I'm Crystal Charbonneau. I work in the RIPDES program. I've been in the program since 2017. And I probably have worked with a few of you already on the last MSGP reissuance when we migrated to NET. So I'm your contact for electronic reporting or any other electronic submissions that you may have through the RIPDES program. Thanks.
Thanks, Crystal and Jennifer. So just to go over some logistics, this is an interactive meeting, but we're going to save that interaction mostly for the end. To start out, cameras and microphones will stay off for everybody but the speakers, which will be mostly me initially. And we are allowing you to provide questions in the chat, and Jennifer and Crystal will answer those as we go along. And if they don't answer them, we'll go over all the questions and answers at the end. So if you want to pay attention to listening, you can just enter your question in, and we will review the answers at the end. And everybody will have an opportunity, if they wish, to raise their hand and ask a question out loud with your camera on or off, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or receive any feedback that you have. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and begin the presentation. So our basic agenda, as I stated earlier, is to talk about the changes to the proposed 2024 MSGP. We already tackled the introductions and logistics. We'll talk a little bit about the current MSGP and how it works. We'll focus mostly on the proposed changes and only the proposed changes. And then lastly, we'll cover the permit reissuance process and the schedule, which I'm sure many of you, if you're a facility representative, are wondering, how do I maintain permit coverage? What do I have to do until the new permit is issued? So we're going to try to answer all those questions and whatever additional questions you have at the end. As I stated, we intend to reissue the MSGP in 2024. It's a 5-year permit. We originally issued it in 2006 and reissued it in 2013 and last issued it in 2019. Adaptive management and pollution prevention are the cornerstones of the RIPDES Industrial Stormwater Program. And that continues in the 2024 MSGP that we intend to issue. We're not intending to change the basic structure of the permit. The basic structure of the 2019 MSGP will be carried forward. That includes the requirement to develop a site-specific stormwater management plan for each site that's covered under the permit. Outflow monitoring and routine inspections will continue to be required, as well as tiered corrective action requirements and annual reporting. DEM staff will continue with compliance monitoring efforts, which includes annual inspections and audits, monitoring DMR submissions or discharge monitoring report submissions, annual reports, and corrective action reports. As I stated in the previous slide, adaptive management or continuous improvement is a big part of the permit. Elliot Anderson, who previously worked in this program, put together the slide that you see in front of you. And he was able to demonstrate that marinas and boat builders were able to reduce the levels of zinc in their discharges over a 2-year period. And this is the type of incremental improvements in water quality that we hope to continue, not just in this sector and for this parameter, but across all sectors and numerous parameters. So we hope that, we can continue this process going forward in the new permit, where site owners are working each year to try to improve their water quality on their site, coming off their site, and make improvements in reducing pollution. The basis for the proposed changes are made up of 3 elements. The first one is lessons learned by DEM during the implementation of the 2019 MSGP. We also adopted or are planning to adopt some elements from EPA's 2021 MSGP. And lastly, in 2017, a committee was formed to consider the advancements in the science of stormwater treatment, and was tasked with balancing environmental protection with the burden on businesses. The committee made recommendations to EPA in a 2019 report known as the 2019 NRC study. DEM reviewed this lengthy study to determine where we can improve our RIPDES MSGP. Getting into the proposed changes. The first set of changes that we will discuss are changes to the benchmark requirements. Benchmarks, unlike permit limits, are a numeric standard established for certain industrial sectors for certain parameters so that facilities can sample for these parameters and determine the concentrations of these parameters in their discharges relative to the benchmark, with the goal of staying below the benchmark in their discharge concentrations. We intend to change the universal benchmark requirement from TSS and oil and grease to TSS and chemical oxygen demand. This new universal benchmark monitoring requirement will apply to all sectors, hence the term universal. And as I said, oil and grease was replaced with COD. This was done to match EPA's 2021 MSGP and to incorporate the recommendations of the 2019 NRC study. COD was determined to be a better universal benchmark parameter as it is indicative of oils and hydrocarbon pollution as well as oxygen demand. And it is a better indicator of overall site cleanliness than oil and grease. Although oil and grease will no longer be a universal benchmark requirement, the 2019 NRC study did recommend that oil and grease benchmarks be applied to certain industrial sectors that are more likely to have industrial activities that would contribute oil and grease to stormwater discharges. As a result, we propose oil and grease monitoring for the sectors that you see on the screen in front of you. Lastly, or the last one that we'll talk about on this slide, is the addition of a copper benchmark for sectors M, Q, R, and AA. The 2019 NRC study included a review of the 2015 EPA MSGP data from net DMR and found that more than 50% of the samples collected from these sectors, shown on the screen in front of you under copper, were above the applicable benchmark for copper. As a result, we intend to propose, or we are proposing, new copper benchmarks for these sectors. The 2019 NRC study had the same findings for sectors A2, N1, F2, and F4. However, the 2019 MSGP already had copper benchmarks for these sectors, and no changes are proposed. Moving on to some additional benchmark changes. We intend to require PCB monitoring for Sector N, scrap recycling and waste recycling facilities, but only those facilities in Sector N that are engaged in the processing of construction and demolition debris. Current scientific literature indicates that there was a potential widespread use of PCB containing building materials in schools and other buildings constructed or renovated between about 1950 and 1979. Based on this information, PCB benchmarks will apply to Sector N if this particular activity is ongoing at their site, at a facility site. It should be noted that the 2019 RIPDES MSGP required PCB benchmarks for Sector N already, but only for those facilities where shredding activities or shredding materials are exposed to stormwater. This previous requirement will continue to apply. We intend to propose new benchmarks for aluminum, copper, lead, and zinc for Sector P, land transportation and warehousing, which includes transfer stations where the temporary storage and/or transfer of solid waste, not including recyclables, is exposed to stormwater. Stormwater sampling data from the 2019 MSGP showed that transfer stations that were engaged in these activities were likely to have exposure that could result in the discharge of these metals. Under a RIPDES MSGP transfer station initiative undertaken by Elliott Anderson, transfer stations were individually required to conduct additional sampling for these metals. To eliminate the need to address these facilities individually outside of the permit, DEM is making this a standard permit requirement for all applicable facilities. The next set of benchmark changes that we are proposing relate to antimony, magnesium, and iron. Starting with antimony. Antimony only currently applies to subsector G2 metal mining. It will continue to apply to subsector G2 metal mining. However, we are reducing the benchmark concentration from 0.64 milligrams per liter to 0.45 milligrams per liter to be consistent with the Rhode Island acute water quality criteria for antimony, as established in our water quality regulations. Since stormwater presents short-term impacts, benchmarks are often established based on acute water quality criteria. We believe that a mistake was made when the permit was issued previously, and we intend to correct this mistake by switching the value of the benchmark from 0.64 to 0.45 milligrams per liter. In regard to magnesium and iron, we intend to remove magnesium and iron from the required benchmarks or the list of required benchmark monitoring for the sectors that you see on the screen in front of you. The 2019 NRC study recommended the removal of these benchmarks, magnesium and iron, across the board based on a lack of documented toxicity. This change that we propose to make is also consistent with EPA's 2021 MSGP. It should also be noted that EPA's water quality regs and Rhode Island's water quality regs do not currently have an acute criteria for magnesium and iron. This also formed the basis for our decision. The last change to the benchmark requirements has to do with clarifying the requirements for sampling. If a facility has collected less than 4 benchmark samples for any one parameter in the year, semi-annual benchmark monitoring must continue. We added this condition to the new 2024 MSGP. Similarly, if a facility has less than 4 benchmark samples that were collected for any one parameter in the year, and the average of the remaining sample results still exceeds the benchmark for a given parameter, corrective actions will be triggered, even if less than 4 samples were collected. We are making this language change, or these language changes to the permit, to establish clear expectations, to establish a level playing field across all facilities, and to remove any potential incentives for failing to sample as required. The next category of changes that we intend to make is by introducing a new type of monitoring, indicator monitoring. Indicator monitoring will now apply to Sector P, including transfer stations, if they are engaged in the temporary storage or transfer of solid waste that is exposed to stormwater. The benchmark parameter that these facilities will need to monitor for is entero, which is a bacteria indicator. The reason why we established an indicator monitoring category is that, and why it differs from benchmark monitoring, is that entero is a bacteria indicator, and bacteria is difficult to completely eliminate from stormwater altogether. However, we still wanted these facilities that had a high likelihood of discharging bacteria to collect data to establish trends to further inform corrective action implementation and stormwater management plan revisions. Stormwater sampling data from the 2019 MSGP showed that transfer stations that were engaged in these particular activities, as described in the slide in front of you, were likely to have bacteria in their discharges. And as I referred to previously, the RIPDES program underwent a transfer station initiative where we worked with the transfer stations to try to improve the water quality, the discharge quality coming off their sites. And as part of that initiative, DEM individually required these facilities under Sector P to conduct additional sampling for Entero. To eliminate the need to address these facilities individually, DEM is including this indicator monitoring requirement for all Sector P facilities in the permit. It should be noted that indicator monitoring will need to be performed at the same frequency as benchmark monitoring. The next set of changes that we are proposing relate to corrective action requirements. Going forward under the 2024 MSGP, corrective action report submissions will need to be electronically provided via upload with the annual report. This will be done via CDX or Net MSGP. In addition, the corrective action report must document any corrective actions that were implemented over the previous year or corrective actions that are planned for the following year. In addition, any operational, structural, or treatment BMPs that were proposed or installed as corrective actions under the 2019 MSGP must be installed or maintained under the 2024 MSGP. The next set of changes relates to changes to the allowable non-stormwater discharge section of the permit. Under the 2019 MSGP, building washdown and power wash water were allowable discharges under the permit. However, consistent with EPA's 2021 MSGP, we are adding additional requirements that facility operators filter, detain, or settle solids or pollutants prior to discharge during these activities. Also consistent with the EPA, also consistent with the 2021 EPA MSGP, we are adding a new allowable non-stormwater discharge to the list of allowable non-stormwater discharges. And that new allowable non-stormwater discharge category is pavement wash water. The exception is this pavement wash water, when discharged, must not contain detergents or hazardous cleaning products. Oil and grease, sources of industrial pollutants, or any other toxic or hazardous materials must also first be cleaned up using dry methods. In like building washdown or power wash water discharges, these discharges must be filtered, detained, and settled to remove as many solids as possible prior to discharge. The next new change to the 2024 MSGP is the category of preparing for and minimizing stormwater impacts during major storm events. The permit now requires facilities to implement structural improvements, enhance resilient pollution prevention measures, and/or other mitigation measures to minimize the impacts of major storm events such as hurricanes, storm surge, extreme heavy precipitation, and flood events. To do this, facility owners are asked to evaluate the likelihood of impacts from major storm events based on their facility location. Appendix E of the draft permit includes guidance and links to online maps. Once you determine your facility's risk, the stormwater management plan should be updated to address ways to minimize pollution potential during major storm events. Such examples include temporarily storing materials and potential pollutants above the base flood elevation level, reinforcing material storage structures to withstand flooding and additional exertion of force, temporarily reducing or eliminating outdoor storage, and planning for future site improvements, considering the facility location and storm event risks. The last group of changes that I would like to discuss are miscellaneous. The first of those is the fact that we are adding language to the permit that clarifies that required monitoring must be completed even if the qualifying rain event is outside of normal business hours. The second miscellaneous change that we're making is removal of the automatic transfer option from the permit. Permits now must be terminated by an existing owner once the property transfers to a new owner, and then the new owner will need to submit a new NOI or notice of intent to apply for coverage. This will need to be done as two separate steps. The reason why we're making this change is because we found that in the net MSGP system, there's a limitation in the system itself where the historical data does not carry forward. As a result, we need transfers of ownership to be done we need the permit to be transferred to a new owner as two separate steps rather than an automatic transfer option. This will allow us to see that history going forward and allow the public to search for that history going forward. The third miscellaneous change that we're proposing is that stormwater management plans must be uploaded as part of the NOI submission. Previously, facilities could provide a website address with a link to their stormwater management plan. We have eliminated this option to make all of the submissions consistent in format, or the way that they're submitted consistent. And also, we're able to view these stormwater management plans once they're submitted. Sometimes the web links no longer work or are not updated. So we prefer this method of reviewing the stormwater management plans as part of the NOI submission, and it allows us to do better compliance monitoring. The fourth miscellaneous change is a change to the record keeping requirements. We're changing the length of time that you must keep records on site from 3 years to 5 years. This change is to be consistent with our RIPDES regulations. The 3-year requirement was consistent with EPA's permit, but we found that we need to make this correction to comply with our own regulations. The last miscellaneous change that we propose is related to an e-reporting rule requirement that EPA has asked us to comply with. To comply with that e-reporting rule, we're asking facilities to provide a 6-digit North American industry classification system code as part of their notice of intent submission. To assist facilities in providing this information, an SIC code and NAICS code crosswalk table is provided in the permit. Please note that SIC codes will continue to determine the sector-specific requirements, including benchmarks. The NAICS code is simply an additional piece of information that you need to provide. That concludes the proposed changes part of our discussion. Moving on to the permit reissuance process and schedule. We anticipate putting out the public notice, the 2024 draft MSGP, in mid to late May. The public notice period will be 30 days long. DEM will respond to any comments received in writing and either issue the permit as originally drafted, issue it with minor changes, or not issue the permit as drafted and start over. The anticipated effective date of the 2024 MSGP is early fall 2024. Our target date is September 1st, 2024. Outfall sampling for new facilities that apply for coverage or existing facilities that reapply for coverage will not begin until January 1st, 2025. A few reminders for facilities who are currently authorized under the 2019 MSGP. Between the permit expiration date, which is nearing May 2nd, 2024, and January 1st, 2025, all permit requirements outlined in the 2019 MSGP will continue to apply to facilities that have existing coverage. The only exception to this is outfall sampling and analysis. This includes the submission of the 2024 annual report. Keep in mind that any facilities that have submitted a no exposure certification or a no discharge certification will not be affected by the permit expiration. For those facilities that intend to renew their coverage when the opportunity arises, a renewal NOI and updated stormwater management plan must be submitted within 90 days of the effective date of the 2024 MSGP. At this point in the presentation, I will turn things over to Jennifer Stout, who will go over the questions that were asked in the chat. She will also review any of the answers, and if there were no answers provided, we will address those. Then we'll open it up to anyone who wants to ask a particular question. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thanks, Brian. So we did get one question that I haven't actually answered yet, so we'll just go ahead and ask that. Taryn asks, do quarterly facility inspections need to be completed during normal business hours, or can they be completed in combination with other monitoring outside? I'm assuming that outside of normal business hours. And I believe the answer is, I don't believe there's any particular requirement in the permit that says you must complete those quarterly facility inspections during normal business hours. So I would think you could do it in combination with whatever other monitoring you're doing, as long as, you know, it's not in the middle of the night and there's no light and you can't see. I suppose that would be my only concern. So
yeah, nothing needs to be completed during normal business hours. Only reason why you try to do it within business hours is because of laboratory hold times. You know, you may have trouble getting the samples to the lab in time if you weren't doing it during normal business hours. So, you know, my advice to permittees is to try to get your sampling and your inspections done early in the period, the monitoring period, so that, you know, if the rain isn't falling, you know, during normal business hours where you can get the work done, you'll have another opportunity within the same monitoring cycle or monitoring period.
Thanks, Brian. The next question is, where can we access the proposed permit during the public notice period? We will be posting that on our website, along with a fact sheet and a copy of this presentation as well. And the slides will all be posted on our website, and I will post that the web link here where we expect it to go. The next question is, our annual inspections and audits by DEM done for all permitted facilities?
I'll take that one, Jen.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, we do spot checks. You know, I think there's roughly 179 different facilities that have a permit with us. Even if we get another staff person, we're not doing an annual inspection or an audit on every facility every year. But we may target those facilities that are having issues. We may just do random inspections. But we do have a certain commitment that we have to keep to do a minimum number of inspections each year.
Is there anybody that would like to come off mute? And if you do, you can just raise your hand, and you can just come off mute, and then we can talk rather than typing. But we do have another question in the chat. Is there a certain frequency a SWIMP should be updated, say every 5 years? Brian, you want to take that one too?
Well, at a minimum, it should be every 5 years, but it also should be, if you're exceeding benchmarks and you need to make a change to your operational BMPs or structural BMPs, would also be required to update the stormwater management plan at that time following those changes. You also may have just some changes to what the facility is, type of work the facility is doing over time during, midway through the permit cycle, and you may need to make stormwater management plan updates then. I would refer to the stormwater management plan section of the permit for all the triggers. The corrective action section has some triggers for when a stormwater management plan needs to be updated. So it's not just once every 5 years. It's based on, certain events occurring as well.
Thanks, Brian. Hope that answered that question. Taryn, you have your hand raised. I have made it so that you can unmute yourself and ask your question if you'd like.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for responding to my other questions. One other question that I had was regarding the benchmark monitoring and the averaging. So is the sample frequency and the averaging requirements the same as the 2019?
Yes.
I don't really understand. Okay, so this is just an enhancement of like
It's
the
just
wording.
like a clarifying statement.
Okay, so there will be no changes to the sample frequency either?
Correct. No, the only changes that are proposed are what I discussed. So everything else will remain the same.
Okay, got it.
So if that helps, that's why I did this presentation this way, so to limit the amount of information you gotta digest. Certainly if there's a facility that doesn't have coverage right now and wants to get coverage and doesn't understand the permit, we're going to provide more guidance and probably have another presentation on how to comply with the permit in general. We're definitely going to do that following the issuance of the permit.
Okay, and then one more thing for the enterococcus monitoring. I know it's an impaired waters requirement for some sectors. And then I saw on so it's just going to become an indicator monitoring requirement for sector P, and then everything else is the same.
Right. So if it was an impaired waters requirement, that's separate from this indicator monitoring requirement. So really, we just are applying entero to sector P if you have these particular solid waste handling activities. And because bacteria is tough to minimize, we didn't want to make it a benchmark, but we did want people to try to address the levels of bacteria coming off their sites if they were in this particular sector. The impaired waters monitoring requirements will remain as a separate requirement.
Yeah,
Okay.
Brian, just to clarify on that though, the one sample can satisfy both the impaired waters and this new entero monitoring, the indicator monitoring requirement. So if your facility was discharging, it happened to be a sector P facility that's discharging to a bacteria impaired water body, that entero sample would satisfy both of those requirements.
Okay, and then the last thing, I'm sorry, I just thought of this, but for benchmark averaging, that's up to the facility to determine whether they've sampled out of monitoring for any parameters.
That's correct.
And do we need to submit anything to you guys?
Well, if you sample out, you need to provide the results on your DMRs, and you need to provide a cover letter and also a NOTI code on the future DMRs saying why you sampled out.
Okay,
And you should
so
also address that in the annual report.
yes, okay, so that's what we've been doing, but so the NOTI is, there's nothing that's gonna like disappear from NetDMR. It's just the same requirements as when we initially registered with a permit, and then we use the NOTI for anything we sampled out of.
Yes, but the benchmark monitoring, all the requirements for monitoring, analytical monitoring will reset, and all facilities will have to sample again, even if they sampled out under the previous permit.
Okay.
You
That's
still
right.
have the ability to sample out, as you said, under this new permit, but you'll have to start the process over.
Okay.
And that's to, address any changes since the facility, got out of sampling, and just to relook at that again. And hopefully, if you had success in the past, you'll have success again. And that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, you have your hand raised and you can take yourself off mute. Thanks.
Hi, yes, my question actually was just answered by Taryn's questions. However, I do have just one point of clarification. It was regarding when a person waivers out, and you answered it by saying you need to enter the NOTI code. It will not disappear from the DMRs. However, you mentioned something about attaching a cover letter, and I just wanted to get a little more clarification on that. Is that something you want attached to the DMRs, or is that just a letter that needs to be submitted to the department?
Crystal, can you take that one?
Sure. So our RIPDES DMR instructions goes over the requirements of the content of the cover letter. And I'm going to post that link in the chat here. But the cover letter would be attached to the DMR when you submit it, when it's, ideally when it's due. And that cover letter would indicate your reasoning for your NOTI code submission, which would be that you're claiming that you met the benchmarks.
So because it never disappears from the DMR, you're essentially reporting this every quarter. Are you attaching the same cover letter every quarter and adding the NOTI code?
I don't know that that's necessary if you have
Just need to do it once.
One at least once.
Yeah.
But you do need to support. You do need to submit the DMRs every 6 months. It's not a quarterly report. It's every 6 months submission.
Understood.
Yes.
Understood. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So NOTI code all the time, but a cover letter only on the initial submission when you've wavered out.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
And those are the kinds of things that we kind of double check when we do an audit, which is sort of an inspection without a physical site inspection. We'll look at records, make sure, the data, you're less than the average for whatever parameters you opted out of. We'll do all those kind of spot checks on an audit versus an inspection, which would require us to review all those documents and submissions, as well as do a site inspection. So we do rely on the permittees to kind of follow the process, but we are checking in to make sure, they understand the process and they're complying correctly.
Good questions. Does anyone have any other questions, either in the chat or you can raise your hand?
And I'll just mention that if anyone has questions, you know, once the new permit is issued, if you're not able to, you know, answer them yourself through the guidance that we provide, feel free to reach out to our program at any time. We want you to be successful. If you're successful, then we're successful. So please reach out to us at our general email address that's shown on the screen, or give me or Jennifer a call, and we'd be happy to help you work out any issues that you have. All right, last call for any additional questions. Any feedback, general feedback besides questions? Time is now, and certainly you can email me after this as well if you have any general feedback that you don't want to share on the recording.
I just
All
want to
right.
say that we will be posting a recording of this presentation and the slides on our website, like we mentioned before. Also, you should be able, when this meeting is over, you should be able to view a recording in your Teams for this meeting. So you'll have direct access to it, at least you should.
All right, I don't see any. Go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, and we'll be doing the public notice, like Brian said, sometime in May.
All right, not seeing any additional questions. I think we'll let you guys all go for the afternoon, evening. Appreciate your attendance and your attention. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.